The holographic projection flickered to life in the Galactic Council chambers, casting an eerie blue glow across the assembled delegates. Ambassador Velthar of the Nexari Empire stood motionless as the transmission from the distant Sol system began to play. What they witnessed would shatter their understanding of the species they had so casually dismissed. The message was simple, delivered by a human female with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held the weight of countless decisions. I am Admiral Korath Vex of the Terran Defense Initiative. Your ultimatum has been received and acknowledged. The Galactic Council had issued their demand 3 standard cycles ago: surrender unconditionally or face complete annihilation. Earth, that backwater planet inhabited by primitive bipeds, had been given the same choice offered to 1,000 other worlds. Most capitulated immediately. A few resisted and were reduced to smoking cinders within hours. But Earth's response was different. Your fleets position themselves at the edge of our solar system, Admiral Vex continued, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. 150 dreadnoughts, each capable of cracking a moon. Impressive by your standards, I'm sure. Velthar's tendrils twitched with amusement. These humans still didn't grasp the futility of their situation. The Nexari war machine had conquered 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. What could one isolated world possibly offer in response? However, the Admiral's tone shifted, becoming something colder, more calculated. You seem to have misunderstood something fundamental about our species. You mistake our diplomacy for weakness, our restraint for inability, our peace for pacifism. The projection zoomed out, revealing the Admiral standing on what appeared to be a command bridge. But the scale was wrong. The viewport behind her stretched impossibly wide, showing stars that seemed to bend and warp around the edges of the frame. You demanded a response to your ultimatum. Very well, we are sending one. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Velthar's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, processing what they had witnessed. The viewport in the human transmission, it was massive beyond anything in their databases. No ship could be that large and still function. Clearly a fabrication, announced Warlord Kexthul, his reptilian features twisted in disdain. Primitive special effects to mask their terror. Our sensors detect no significant energy signatures from the Sol system. Their largest vessels barely qualify as corvettes by our standards. But Velthar wasn't convinced. There had been something in the human admiral's eyes, not fear, not desperation, but a cold certainty that sent chills through their exoskeleton. Sir, came a voice from the sensor operator's station, we're detecting a massive gravitational anomaly emerging from the Sol system's outer asteroid belt. The main display shifted to show long-range scans of the human home system. For a moment, nothing seemed different. Then space itself began to distort, reality bending around something vast and incomprehensible. That's impossible, Kexthul snarled. Nothing that size could— His words died as the thing fully emerged from behind the asteroid field. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a moving section of space-time itself, a construct so massive that nearby asteroids were drawn into orbit around it. The hull, if it could be called that, seemed to be made of compressed matter, dark energy, and what appeared to be weaponized physics. The human response wasn't a fleet. It was a single vessel that dwarfed their entire armada combined, a manifestation of engineering so advanced it challenged the very laws of reality they thought they understood, and it was heading directly toward them. The Nexari fleet hung motionless. In the void, their crews staring at sensor readings that defied comprehension. The human construct, they had no other word for it, approached at a velocity that should have been impossible for something of its mass. Yet there it was, distorting space-time itself to achieve faster-than-light travel without any conventional drive signature. Fleet Admiral Zefkol stood rigid on the bridge of the Dominion's edge, his 4 arms clasped behind his carapace as he studied the approaching behemoth. 40 years of conquest had prepared him for many things, but not this. The construct measured over 2,000 kilometers in length, its bulk eclipsing entire moons. More disturbing than its size was its composition. Hull sections that seemed to phase in and out of visible reality, weapon emplacements that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "How long have they been building this thing?" whispered his tactical officer, Mordith. Zefkol didn't answer immediately. The question haunted him as well. The Nexari had been monitoring Earth for 50 standard years, ever since their expansion had reached this spiral arm. Every scan had shown a technologically developing species barely capable of interplanetary travel. Their most advanced vessels were primitive chemical rockets with nuclear warheads, toys compared to Nexari technology. Yet this monstrosity suggested centuries, perhaps millennia, of advanced development. The implications were staggering. "Sir, incoming transmission from the construct," reported the communications officer. The main screen shimmered, revealing the same human admiral from before. But now she stood on what was clearly the command deck of the approaching vessel, and the scale was even more overwhelming. The chamber behind her stretched beyond the limits of the viewport, disappearing into mechanical infinity. "I am Admiral Korath Vex, commanding the TDS Retribution's Shadow," she began, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to resonate through the hull of every Nexari ship. "You appear confused by our response. Allow me to clarify a few misconceptions." The view shifted, showing a holographic display of the Milky Way galaxy. Hundreds of systems were marked in red. Every world the Nexari had conquered over the past century. "You've been quite busy," the Admiral continued. 43 species completely exterminated. 117 more subjugated and enslaved. "Your expansion has been thorough." Zefkol's mandibles clicked nervously. How could they know such detailed information about Nexari operations? "What you failed to understand," Admiral Vex continued, "is that we've been watching, not just your conquest of our local systems, but your entire expansion across this galactic arm. Every world you've destroyed, every species you've enslaved, every act of casual genocide. We've recorded it all." The holographic display zoomed in on specific systems, showing time-lapse recordings of Nexari fleets reducing civilizations to ash. "The question you should be asking yourselves isn't how we built this ship," the Admiral's voice grew colder, "but why we built it. You see, the Retribution's Shadow isn't Earth's first line of defense. It's our response to what we've witnessed you do to others." The transmission cut to external views of the construct, revealing details that made the Nexari crews recoil in horror. The hull wasn't just massive, it was alive in some fundamental way, surfaces rippling with energy patterns that suggested consciousness. Weapon ports the size of cities tracked the movements of every Nexari vessel with predatory precision. "This ship represents the collective work of every species you've encountered in this sector," Admiral Vex explained as the camera panned across sections of the hull displaying architectural styles from dozens of different civilizations. The Veltrani provided the dimensional folding technology. The Korthai contributed their matter compression techniques. The Zinthara shared their consciousness transfer protocols. Zefkol felt his twin hearts hammering against his chest plates. The species names were familiar. All races the Nexari had supposedly exterminated decades ago. "They're not dead," he whispered, understanding flooding through him like ice water. "Evacuation," Admiral Vex continued, as if hearing his realization. "Across the void. We've been conducting evacuation operations for the better part of a century. Every world you thought you destroyed, every species you believed extinct, we saved as many as we could, and together, we built this." The Retributions. Shadow continued its approach, and now the Nexari could see the true horror of human ingenuity. This wasn't just a warship, it was a mobile world, a ark of vengeance carrying the survivors of 100 worlds, all united by a single purpose, and that purpose was rapidly approaching weapon range. The revelation hit the Nexari fleet like a physical blow. In the deepest sections of the Retribution's shadow, entire cities existed within the ship's hull. Not human cities, but the architectural marvels of dozens of supposedly extinct civilizations. The transmission now showed these survivors, their faces displaying a mixture of determination and righteous fury that transcended species barriers. Chinvel, the last surviving architect of the crystal cities of Nimthara, stood beside Dr. Ravenna. Kess, a human xenobiologist whose work had made the massive evacuation operations possible. Their species had never met before Earth's intervention, yet they worked together with the fluid efficiency born of shared purpose. The Nexari strategic doctrine relies on absolute information superiority, Dr. Kess explained to the watching fleet, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent studying their enemies. Complete annihilation of planetary populations ensures no survivors can provide intelligence to other worlds. It's crude, but effective. The display shifted to show hidden monitoring stations scattered throughout the galaxy, some disguised as asteroids, others as cosmic debris. All had been watching, recording, preparing for this moment. What they didn't account for, continued Chinvel, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns that conveyed deep emotion, was a species capable of reaching them before the killing began. Humans possess a unique trait among galactics species, their inability to ignore suffering. Fleet Admiral Zefkol watched the transmission with growing dread. The tactical implications were staggering. If humans had been conducting evacuation operations for decades, if they possessed stealth technology advanced enough to slip past Nexari sensors, then everything the Empire thought it knew about Galactic. Military balance was wrong. Sir, his intelligence officer Rakthor spoke in hushed tones. If they saved significant populations from multiple worlds, the combined knowledge base they're working with... Zefkol didn't need the thought completed. Each conquered species had possessed unique technological advantages. The Veltrani had been masters of dimensional manipulation before their apparent extinction. The Korthai had developed matter compression beyond anything in Nexari databases. The Zinthara had achieved consciousness transfer on a planetary scale. Individually, these technologies had been interesting but manageable threats. Combined and improved upon by human ingenuity, they became something far more dangerous. The transmission continued, showing vast construction bays within the ship where impossible technologies merged seamlessly. Zinthara consciousness networks provided instantaneous communication across the vessel's vast bulk. Veltrani dimensional folding allowed spaces larger than entire worlds to exist within the ship's hull. Korthai matter compression created armor that existed in multiple states of reality simultaneously. The Retribution's shadow is more than a warship. Admiral Vex reappeared on screen, now flanked by representatives of 20 different species. It's a mobile civilization, carrying the combined scientific achievements of 43 supposedly extinct peoples. Each of you thought you had eliminated a problem. Instead, you created a solution. Behind the Admiral, vast viewports revealed glimpses of the ship's interior. Forests from a dozen worlds growing under artificial suns. Cities suspended in zero gravity, where physics-defying architecture housed millions of survivors. Laboratories, where the greatest minds of multiple species worked in unprecedented collaboration. But the most remarkable thing about this ship, the Admiral continued, isn't its technology or its size, it's its purpose. You see, we didn't build the Retribution's shadow to conquer. We built it to ensure that what you've done to others never happens again. The transmission shifted to show weapon systems that defied classification, energy cannons that fired concentrated gravity waves, missile tubes that launched projectiles. Through dimensional rifts, shield generators that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Every weapon on this ship, explained Vex Nathi, a being whose species had been among the first to fall to Nexari expansion, was designed with a single target in mind. We studied your technology, your tactics, your psychology. This vessel exists to counter everything you are. The weight of those words settled over the Nexari fleet, like a death shroud. They weren't facing an unknown enemy stumbling through first contact. They were facing an enemy that had been specifically designed to destroy them, built by the combined knowledge of everyone they had wronged. You wanted a response to your ultimatum, Admiral Vex concluded, her image now displayed on every screen, throughout the Nexari fleet. Here it is. Surrender unconditionally, and we will show you the same mercy you showed others. Continue your expansion, and discover why a species that builds peace ships also builds vessels of absolute war. The transmission ended, leaving the Nexari fleet alone with the approaching shadow of their own making. The silence that followed the transmission was broken only by the hum of ship systems and the barely audible whispers of terror rippling through. The Nexari fleet. Fleet Admiral Zefkol stood motionless, his forearms trembling slightly as he processed the implications of what they faced. "Sir," came the voice of his weapons officer, Grixtar, "shall we prepare for engagement? Our combined firepower still outmasses their single vessel." Zefkol's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Outmasses? Look at our sensors, officer. That ship's mass readings are fluctuating between impossible values. Standard physics don't apply to whatever the humans have built." The Retribution's shadow had positioned itself at the edge of weapon range, its presence warping local spacetime to such a degree that nearby asteroids were being drawn into complex orbital patterns around its hull. More disturbing were the energy readings, power signatures that suggested the ship was barely operating at minimal capacity, yet still generating more energy than the entire Nexari fleet combined. "Fleet Admiral," the communications array crackled to life. "We're receiving individual transmissions on all ships, private channels." Zefkol's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Clarify." "Sir, every member of our crews is receiving personal messages. Different languages, different species of origin, but all from the human ship." The implications sent ice through Zefkol's veins. To send individualized messages to 40,000 crew members across 150 ships required computational power beyond comprehension and intelligence gathering that suggested the humans knew intimate details about every single Nexari soldier. "Put one through to my station," he ordered, dreading what he might hear. The holographic display activated, showing a being Zefkol recognized with shock. Velmoth, the former military strategist of the Kethrani Empire. The Nexari had conquered that system 15 years ago, supposedly leaving no survivors. "Greetings, Fleet Admiral Zefkol." Velmoth spoke in perfect Nexari, his 6 eyes holding an intelligence that had once challenged the Empire's expansion. "I remember you well. You commanded the assault on our 3rd moon, where my youngest Spawn were stationed at the Defense Academy." Zefkol's breath caught. He remembered that battle, a minor skirmish that had ended with the Academy's destruction and the deaths of several hundred young Kethrani. "You specifically ordered the bombardment of civilian shelters," Velmoth continued, his voice carrying decades of suppressed rage. "Your tactical report described it as eliminating future resistance elements. You were referring to children, Admiral, children who posed no threat to your empire." "How are you alive?" Zefkol whispered. "Human extraction teams reached our world 6 hours before your final bombardment. They saved 40% of our population, including myself. I've spent the last 15 years studying Nexari military doctrine, identifying weaknesses, preparing for this moment." The transmission shifted, showing technical specifications that made Zefkol's tactical mind real. Every Nexari ship design, every weapon system, every piece of defensive technology, all analyzed, countered, and defeated in theoretical simulations run millions of times. "The humans call it total warfare preparation," Velmoth explained. Every surviving species has contributed their knowledge of Nexari capabilities. We know your shield frequencies, your hull composition, your ammunition loads, even your psychological profiles. Similar conversations were happening across the fleet as crew members faced the ghosts of their conquered enemies. Engineers received technical analyses from species they'd helped exterminate. Gunners heard from survivors of worlds they'd bombarded. Command staff listened to tactical briefings from military leaders they thought they'd killed. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Doubt spread through the fleet like a virus as soldiers realized they weren't facing an unknown enemy, but the collective vengeance of everyone they'd wronged. "Sir," Rackthor reported, his voice shaking, "we're detecting massive power fluctuations throughout our fleet. Morale is... Sir, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 ships." Zefkol closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command crushing down upon him. The Nexari Empire had built its expansion on the foundation of absolute victory through overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy that understood them completely, that had been specifically designed to counter every advantage they possessed. "Admiral Vex," he opened a communication channel to the human ship. "I request parley." The response came immediately, as if it had been anticipated. "Granted, but understand, Fleet Admiral, that this conversation will be broadcast to every world, in both our territories. No more conducting business in shadows." The main screen activated, showing Admiral Vex standing in what appeared to be a massive amphitheater within the Retribution's shadow. Behind her sat representatives of dozens of species, all watching with the patience of those who had waited lifetimes for justice. "You have something to say to the galaxy, Fleet Admiral?" Admiral Vex asked, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Zefkol looked around his bridge, seeing his crew's faces reflected in the screens, faces filled with doubt, fear, and the dawning realization that their empire's reign of terror was ending. The choice before him would determine the fate of the Nexari Empire and echo throughout galactic history. Fleet Admiral Zefkol stood before the assembled remnants of galactic civilization, knowing his next words would either save his empire or seal its doom. The amphitheater aboard the Retribution's shadow held not just survivors, but holographic representations of every world currently under Nexari occupation. Billions of beings watching their would-be liberators face their oppressors. "I am Fleet Admiral Zefkol of the Nexari Imperial Navy," he began, his voice carrying across the void to every corner of known space. "For 40 years, I have served an empire built on the principle of absolute dominance through superior force." Admiral Vex remained motionless, her expression unreadable as she allowed the Nexari commander to speak his piece. Behind her, the survivors sat in perfect silence, waiting for words that might never come. "We conquered because we could," Zefkol continued, the weight of decades crushing down upon him. "We destroyed worlds because resistance was inefficient. We exterminated species because survivors were inconvenient." Throughout the Nexari fleet, crew members listened to their commander's words with growing unease. Some had joined the military for glory, others for survival within the Empire's harsh hierarchy. None had truly considered the scope of what they had participated in until this moment. But standing here, facing the evidence of our actions reflected in the eyes of those we presumed dead, I begin to understand what we have become. Zefkol's voice cracked slightly. "We are not conquerors. We are not builders of civilization. We are a plague that has consumed everything beautiful in this galaxy." The amphitheater stirred. Some survivors leaned forward, hoping for the words that might make their suffering meaningful. Others sat back, skeptical of any Nexari expression of remorse. "I have received reports from my fleet," Zefkol continued. "Every crew member has been contacted by survivors of worlds we destroyed. Engineers who watched their cities burn. Scientists who saw their life's work obliterated. parents who lost children to our efficiency. The main display shifted to show internal feeds from Nexari ships, revealing crew members in various states of psychological breakdown. Some wept openly as they listened to testimonies from survivors. Others sat in stunned silence, processing the reality of their actions for the first time. "Admiral Vex," Zefcol addressed the human commander directly, "your species has accomplished something unprecedented. You have forced us to see ourselves as we truly are. The question becomes, what happens now?" Admiral Vex stepped forward, her presence commanding attention throughout the amphitheater. "That depends entirely on your choice, Fleet Admiral. The Nexari Empire has two paths before it." The display changed, showing a holographic map of Nexari territory. Red zones indicated occupied worlds, while blue markers showed the locations of human extraction operations still in progress. Path 1. Continue your expansion. Attempt to destroy us, knowing that failure means the complete dismantlement of your empire and the liberation of every world you control. Admiral Vex's voice carried the certainty of someone holding superior cards. "The Retribution's shadow is not alone, Fleet Admiral. It is the first of 7 vessels currently approaching different sectors of your territory. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Nexari fleet. 7 ships like the one before them could end their empire in a matter of days. Path 2, Admiral," Vex continued. "Voluntary dissolution of the Nexari Empire, withdrawal from all occupied territories, participation in a galactic truth and reconciliation process overseen by the survivors you've wronged." "And what of my people?" Zefcol asked. "The Nexari civilians who know nothing of military operations? The billions who simply exist within our territories?" For the first time, Admiral Vex's expression softened slightly. They would be offered the same choice given to every species: integration into a galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination. "Your people have talents, Admiral. Engineering capabilities, organizational skills, strategic thinking. These could be turned toward building rather than destroying." Chinvel, the Nimtharan architect, stood and addressed the Nexari commander directly. "My people harbored no hatred for individual Nexari soldiers. We hated the system that sent you to destroy us. Eliminate the system, and reconciliation becomes possible." Similar voices rose throughout the amphitheater as survivor after survivor offered perspectives that transcended simple vengeance. They spoke of justice, of accountability, of the possibility that even their oppressors might find redemption through genuine change. "Fleet Admiral," came the voice of his own second-in-command, Commander Velcris, over the private channel. "The crew is requesting permission to hear your decision before you announce it publicly." Zefcol nodded, activating the fleet-wide communication system. "All vessels, all crew, prepare for general address." He looked one final time at the massive human ship that had shattered everything he thought he knew about power, about civilization, about the nature of strength itself. "Citizens of the Nexari Empire," he began, "our children will inherit either the legacy of our crimes or the possibility of our redemption. Today, we choose which future we leave them." The next words would reshape the galaxy. "Citizens of the Nexari Empire." Fleet Admiral Zefcol's voice echoed across 1,000 worlds, reaching every Nexari military installation, every occupied planet, every civilian habitat within the Empire's vast territory. Today marks the end of our expansion, and perhaps the beginning of our redemption. The silence that followed was deafening. On the bridge of the Dominion's edge, Zefcol's crew watched their commander with expressions ranging from shock to relief to profound uncertainty. 40 years of absolute military doctrine had prepared them for many scenarios, but not for voluntary surrender to an enemy they'd underestimated so completely. "By my authority as Fleet Admiral of the Nexari Imperial Navy, I hereby order the immediate cessation of all military operations, the withdrawal of occupation forces from all conquered territories, and the unconditional surrender of the Nexari Empire to the coalition of survivors." Throughout Nexari space, the reaction was immediate and chaotic. Some commanders refused to accept the order, declaring Zefkol a traitor and vowing to continue the fight. Others, faced with the evidence of what their empire had become, began the complex process of military stand-down. On occupied worlds, civilian populations watched in stunned disbelief as their oppressors suddenly announced their departure. Aboard the Retribution's shadow, Admiral Vex monitored the dissolution with the calm efficiency of someone who had planned for every contingency. The ship's vast intelligence networks tracked the movement of every Nexari vessel, cataloged every weapon stockpile, and identified commanders who might attempt to continue resistance. "Admiral," reported Dr. Ravenna Kess, "we're detecting 6 fleet elements refusing to comply with Zefkol's surrender order. Combined strength of approximately 30 vessels." "Expected," Admiral Vex replied. "Chinvel, initiate Protocol 7. It's time to demonstrate why compliance is preferable to resistance." The Nimtharan architect nodded, their crystalline form pulsing with controlled energy as they accessed the ship's dimensional manipulation systems. Reality twisted around the Retribution's shadow as it simultaneously existed in multiple locations, appearing instantly beside each rebellious fleet element. The effect was psychologically devastating. Nexari commanders who had refused to surrender suddenly found themselves facing the massive human construct at point-blank range, its weapon systems powered and targeting solutions locked. The display of instantaneous interstellar movement shattered any remaining illusions about the technological gap they faced. "This is Admiral Korath Vex to all Nexari forces," her voice reached every rebellious commander simultaneously. "Your fleet admiral has made his choice. You can honor his decision, or you can discover why we built weapons specifically designed to counter your technology." The first demonstration came when Commander Hex Thul of the 47th Destroyer Squadron attempted to fire on the human ship. His energy beams simply passed through sections of the Retribution's shadow that had shifted into dimensional phase, while return fire materialized inside his vessel's shields, delivering precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses that disabled his ships without destroying them. Within 6 hours, organized Nexari military resistance had effectively ended. The empire that had terrorized a galaxy for generations dissolved in less than a day, undone not by superior firepower alone, but by the weight of its own accumulated guilt made manifest. The real work, however, was just beginning. Fleet Admiral Zefkol, Admiral Vex addressed the Nexari commander as Liberation fleets departed for occupied worlds. "Your military is disbanded, your empire ended, but your people remain. The question becomes, what kind of civilization will you build from? The ashes of what you were?" The holographic display showed scenes from across former Nexari territory. Occupation forces loading onto transport ships, enslaved populations emerging from underground hiding places, families separated by decades of oppression, beginning the process of reunion. "I don't know," Zefkol answered honestly. "For generations, my people have known only military hierarchy and imperial expansion. We've forgotten how to exist as anything else." "Then you'll learn," said Velmoth, the Ketharani strategist who had become one of the Coalition's primary architects. "We learned how to survive extinction. You can learn how to live without domination. The process would take decades. Nexari worlds would be integrated into the Coalition structure gradually, their populations educated about the true scope of their empire's actions while being offered opportunities to contribute to galactic reconstruction. War crimes tribunals would address the worst offenders, while ordinary citizens would participate in truth and reconciliation processes designed to heal rather than simply punish. "There is one final matter," Admiral Vex announced as the formal dissolution ceremonies concluded. The Retribution's shadow was built for a specific purpose, to end the Nexari Empire. That purpose has been achieved. The question becomes, what do we do with a weapon designed to terrify? The answer would define the next era of galactic civilization. 6. Months after the dissolution of the Nexari Empire, the Retribution's shadow hung motionless in the void between star systems, its massive bulk no longer radiating the controlled menace that had terrified a galaxy. Within its vast chambers, the greatest minds of 43 species grappled with a question that would define the future of galactic civilization. What to do with a weapon too powerful to ignore, too dangerous to keep, and too valuable to destroy. Admiral Korath Vex stood in the ship's central council chamber, now reconfigured as a democratic forum where every survivor species held equal voice. The military hierarchy that had commanded during wartime had given way to something unprecedented, a truly collaborative government representing the remnants of dozens of civilizations. The ship has served its purpose, argued Velmoth, the Kethrani strategist whose tactical analyses had made victory possible. The Nexari Empire is dissolved, their military disbanded, their conquered worlds liberated. Perhaps it's time to dismantle this vessel and distribute its technologies peacefully. Murmurs of agreement rippled through sections of the assembly. But Chinvel rose to offer a different perspective. Dismantlement assumes the Nexari were the only threat in this galaxy. Our intelligence networks suggest at least 3 other expansionist empires in distant spiral arms, each following similar patterns of conquest and extermination. The holographic display activated, showing long-range surveys of galactic territories beyond former Nexari space. The Krone hegemony commanded 17 star systems through brutal technological superiority. The Vashatai collective consumed entire worlds to fuel their hive mind expansion. The Infinite Reach practiced systematic cultural annihilation on an even greater scale than the Nexari had achieved. The question, said Dr. Ravenna Kess, her human perspective bringing unique clarity to the debate, is whether we built a weapon to stop one empire or whether we built the foundation of something larger. Admiral Vex listened to the debate with the patience of someone who had already made her decision but needed to ensure consensus. The weight of command had changed her over the months of reconstruction. The cold certainty that had terrified Nexari fleet commanders had been tempered by the complex realities of governing a coalition of survivors. "May I propose a synthesis?" She finally spoke, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. The Retribution's shadow was built as a weapon of terror, designed to end the Nexari Empire through overwhelming force and psychological intimidation. That mission is complete. But within this ship's hull, we've created something else. A mobile civilization representing the best of what dozens of species can achieve together. The assembly quieted, sensing the weight of what was coming. I propose we transform the Retribution's shadow from a vessel of war into a vessel of protection, a mobile guardian that ensures no empire ever again achieves what the Nexari accomplished. Not through conquest, but through the promise that expansion through extermination will always meet an equal and opposite response. The debate that followed lasted for weeks. Some argued for complete demilitarization, others for maintaining the ship as a deterrent. Engineers proposed modifications that would reduce its weapons capabilities while enhancing its role as a mobile research station and diplomatic platform. The final decision came not from debate, but from an unexpected source. Former Fleet Admiral Zefkol, now serving as a liaison between the coalition and reformed Nexari civilian governments, requested permission to address the assembly. For 40 years, I served an empire that believed strength came from the ability to destroy, he said, his 4 arms trembling slightly as he faced the survivors of his former enemies. I've spent these past months learning a different truth. That true strength comes from the ability to protect. He gestured toward the viewport, where construction ships from dozens of species worked together to establish the first truly integrated galactic settlement. Keep your ship, Admiral Vex, not as a weapon, but as a promise. A promise that those who build will always have guardians, that those who create will never stand alone against those who would destroy. The vote was unanimous. The Retribution's shadow was transformed over the following months. Weapon systems were reconfigured as defensive arrays capable of protecting entire star systems. Combat factories became research laboratories where the combined knowledge of survivor species pushed the boundaries of science and philosophy. Military barracks transformed into schools where the next generation learned cooperation instead of conquest. But the ship retained its essential capability, the power to appear anywhere in the galaxy, to stand between predator and prey, to ensure that the phrase "never again" carried more weight than empty promise. Years later, when the Kron hegemony attempted their first extermination campaign beyond their home territory, they found the Retribution's shadow waiting for them. Not as a weapon of conquest, but as a guardian of civilization itself, a living reminder that in a galaxy full of those who would destroy, there would always be those willing to protect. The ship's motto, inscribed in the languages of every survivor, species, became legend throughout the galaxy. From the ashes of the lost, hope for the living. Admiral Korath Vex, now bearing the title of Guardian Prime, stood once again on the bridge where she had declared war on an empire. But now she looked out not at enemies to be defeated, but at a galaxy slowly learning that strength and compassion were not opposites, but partners in the long work of building something better than what came before. The Retribution's shadow had served its purpose as Earth's terrifying response to an ultimatum. Now it served a greater purpose, as proof that sometimes the most fearsome weapon of all is hope made manifest, backed by the unshakable resolve to never let the darkness win. In the end, Earth's response wasn't just a warship meant to terrify. It was a promise meant to endure.